Last week, the new Public Works Minister, Dean Macpherson, said the days of ministers living in luxury at the expense of taxpayers is a thing of the past. Macpherson is tightening the screws on funds being spent on cabinet members' government homes and offices during his tenure. He confirmed that there will be no procuring of any new housing stock or offices for both the new executive and parliamentarians. In February last year, the Democratic Alliance revealed that ANC ministers and deputy ministers occupy properties in Cape Town and Pretoria worth 967 million rand. Minister Macpherson joins us now for a discussion on his vision and plans for the department. Good to have you. Welcome to the program, Minister.
Good morning, Leanne, and it's great to be with the Morning Live team.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you. Have you gotten used to being called minister? Do you sort of turn around and say, "Are you talking to me?" Are you used to it now?
I much prefer it if you call me Dean, so please do so. I'm much more comfortable with that first name basis.
Unfortunately, we're going to stick to the minister for now. But I mean, it does come with a lot of changes. Obviously, I mean, this is it's a very big portfolio, and I think you've really given us a lot of food for thought already within the small amount of time that you've been in it as to how important it is and how much needs to be done in this particular department. I mean, let's start with your comments saying that the department will not be procuring any new houses or offices for the executives, and perhaps you can outline the reasons for this.
Absolutely, Leanne. In terms of the Executive Members Handbook, in Chapter 8, Section 8, it says that the Minister of Public Works is responsible for issuing guidelines on expenditure related to the procurement of homes, offices, furniture, and so on. And when I had a meeting with the Director General, I asked him, whether there was any need to procure any new homes or offices. And he assured me that there is enough stock to meet the needs even of the larger executive, and that we have sufficient office space to assist all members to be able to do their work either in Cape Town or Pretoria. But I also wanted to say that, often we've seen, and every year it comes out in parliamentary questions, the amount of money that Public Works spends on fixtures, fittings, renovations, on the interior of the homes. And when the choice became between, spending that kind of money, I think that there was a reply that said there was a curtain rail that was bought for 50,000 Rand. And the choice is between that and investing every single cent that we can in public infrastructure to grow our economy and to create jobs. It's a very easy choice for me to make. So it was just simply using the prerogative that I have in terms of the Executive Members Handbook to issue those guidelines and to say that we need to live within our means. And this department now needs to be solely focused on understanding what public assets it has so it can be used for public good, and to ensure that we ramp up the infrastructure drive of this department so that we turn South Africa into a construction site to grow our economy and create jobs.
Yeah. I want to just quiz a little bit more on this, the housing and the perks that come with the ministries, because they've never been there's never in our history been a bigger cabinet. I mean, we've got 32 ministers and 43 deputy ministers. The DA have always been very critical about the lavish lifestyles of those that are ministers and deputy ministers, houses, cars, staff for days. Everything is taken care of, everything is paid for. Can I ask you this? Do you know of any of your colleagues or any deputy ministers or ministers that have declined to take up some of these perks in terms of the housing and the scores of staff? Do you have any idea if this has actually happened?
Leanne, I mean, we've been in office for today, it's a week since we were sworn in. And I can tell you that myself and every other member is either living in their own home or in the parliamentary village where they were originally living in. There are no blue lights on our cars. And at this point, our offices are very thinly staffed. So, that is where we are at the moment. Of course, these things are nuanced questions as well, because, the reality is that, these homes are there. They, if they're not used, they still are in the possession of the state. We still have to maintain them as the Department of Public Works. And so those discussions will be had at the relevant point when we have to start dealing with that issue, but it is not before us at this point. We also need to be careful, Leanne, that the DA and our ministers aren't so hamstrung that we aren't able to do our jobs. I mean, I think that one has to appreciate that we've literally been thrown into the deep end, and a challenge that we gladly accept. But it is going to require staff and resources to be able to do this job and to be able to get to the bottom of fixing and turning around these departments so they can work for the good of all South Africans. As an example, in the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, we have an incomplete immovable asset register, which means that I have no idea with certainty about how many assets the state actually owns and what is the true value of that. Those aren't my assets, but they are our assets as the country. And if we don't know that, we can't use them for the public good. And to this point, it hasn't been done particularly well to understand, what those assets are worth and where they are. And so that's going to require, staff and processes to get to the bottom of that so that we can better use those assets for leverage to be able to drive our infrastructure dream for this country.
Yeah.
So we are slowly but surely working through these issues. And as we do so, we'll continue to be able to update South Africans on the decisions and the tough choices that we have to make.
Let's look at the infrastructure backlog, because this is something that you are moving into, and there is a major backlog when we talk about infrastructure that's running into billions of rands. How are you going to deal with this? What is your first port of call to try and sort this out?
Leanne, I've become hugely animated and passionate about this issue of infrastructure, because no country can grow its economy and create jobs without a long and sufficient pipeline of infrastructure projects. And I think that we face two problems that, as I see it. One, we aren't developing a pipeline of projects that are sufficient in value and scope and depth at the rate that we need to. We need to move gross capital formation, which is investment in fixed infrastructure, from 14% to 30%. And so we're about halfway of where we need to be. And so we need to be able to create a better system through Infrastructure South Africa, which I really am very impressed with, to be able to lead with greater confidence and with greater speed the ability to drive those infrastructure projects. Alongside that is the very serious and chronic underinvestment in bulk infrastructure at local government, which is then able to allow greater infrastructure on a national basis to be able to build on top of that. And that's a very serious concern for me, because if local government is not able to come to the party in terms of bulk infrastructure, which is like water and sanitation and electricity transmission, then we're going to have a serious problem. So we've got to deal with the supply side and the financing side on the one hand. On the other hand, we need to deal, which is becoming a growing problem in the country, which is the halting and disruption of infrastructure projects by so-called construction mafia, who want a piece of the pie, who hold, literally projects hostage, communities hostage, and are not being, dealt with the seriousness and I think the force of action that is required by the state. We have, tens of billions of rands worth of infrastructure projects that are being held up that are, that actually at the very core hurt local communities that so desperately require infrastructure development. So those are the two problems as I see them, and both of which we're going to have to deal with equal intensity.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously coming from the back of what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal. And KwaZulu-Natal, I mean, when we talk of the construction mafia, it is absolutely horrendous what's happening there. And we are seeing this at play every single day. And many people saying that these people come through and they pretend to be business forums, they demand percentages, and you know there's just, it is such a mess within this mafia and infrastructure and the kind of products that are actually being put out, that people are, you know, they get houses that are falling apart, that are just built so badly, tenders are given and the product is never given in the condition that it should be. I mean, these are very, very difficult things, and I imagine a major priority. How do you plan on wielding your sword through this mafia? Because this is going to be one of your biggest issues to deal with.
Leanne, let's be clear. The mafia is not business forums. They are well organized, highly armed, highly sophisticated criminal networks that exist in places like KwaZulu-Natal and now in the city of Cape Town. These are not people who have good intentions. And so they must be treated as such. They must be treated as enemies of our communities and enemies of the state. And law enforcement must act against them with the speed and force that is required. Because if we don't create confidence in our infrastructure rollout plan, that it's not going to be disrupted, it's not going to run over time, it's not going to run over budget, we're not going to get the private sector investment to partner with us to be able to leverage and create more infrastructure development projects. So we've got to agree on that point, that they should be treated as enemies of the state. The second way I think that we can deal with this is actually partnering with communities to better help communities understand the importance of infrastructure, that it's their infrastructure to own, it's their infrastructure to look after, and get more out of that infrastructure over a period of time. The second thing that I want to hopefully do as soon as possible is have a meeting with the Minister of Police, Senzo Mchunu, who also comes from KwaZulu-Natal, and be able to develop a more robust joint action plan to deal with the construction mafia. I think the city of Cape Town, to its credit, has come out very strongly against this. They've made more resources, more money available to push back against them, offering rewards for information that leads to the arrest of the masterminds of these networks. And those are the sorts of, I think, things that we can learn from other spheres of government on how to deal with the scourge that is becoming more and more problematic in the country.
Yeah. Let's move on to the mismanagement of government land and buildings, because this is a big bugbear, I know, of the DA. I mean, such as the bungled 1 billion rand Telkom Towers debacle, a botched border fence contract at Beitbridge. We saw this, and we heard the DA calling for a full review of the department's mandate with a view to giving line departments the authority to manage their own buildings. Do you still stand with that way of thinking?
Leanne, the reality is that the assets of this department are the public's assets, and we must work out how to use them for public good. So it perfectly makes sense that where a department like the Department of Human Settlements needs more land for social housing, we must make that available to them, and we must do so with speed so that we can get these projects off of the ground. Where a local municipality requires a building for social housing, or that building has become dilapidated, overrun, and invaded by people who shouldn't be living there, and they want to take that over to be able to develop for social housing or for any other need, let us give that to them so that we take that responsibility away from the department. So we've got to work in a more collaborative way to be able to use the assets that we have for public good. We've also got to be able to upgrade our assets as well. I don't like the fact that we own some really lovely buildings that are just not being looked after, and not competing at the market rate that the private sector does. I'm not suggesting for a moment that government should ever be in the business of trying to compete with the private sector in terms of rentals, but we've got to start getting closer to that and stop charging the paltry amounts that we have. And I've said to my department very clearly, we've got one of two options to deal with the financial situation that we find ourselves in. We've either got to start becoming a cash generating department that generates money as any other property group or landlord would, or we have to start looking at how we're going to optimize our assets to generate that cash. So I think that we're going to have a long and hard look at how we're going to do that. I met with the executive team last week, and there is buy-in into that. And it's not to say that we're going to have a wholesale fire sale of public assets, but we need to look at better using them so that this department does not become a drain on the national fiscus. There's also another point that I need to be very clear on, Leanne, that public works is no longer the punching bag for other departments across the country. We provide services to clients which are other departments, and they owe us 18 billion rand in unpaid service charges for this department. We can't carry that for them. And so as a department, we are audited against not collecting those service charges, but those departments are not audited for not paying us. And that is not a fair situation to be in. So I'm really looking forward to meeting with my colleagues and seeing how can we resolve these sorts of things. But I really want public works and infrastructure to become a department that South Africans are proud in, that they see themselves in, that is trustworthy, transparent, and delivers goods and services for the betterment of South Africa.
So just a quick look at what the government owns. So, I mean, on the books and the facts out there is that the government owns 88,000 buildings. You've mentioned that as well. About 3,700 properties that at this point are standing vacant, a lot of them around the country. They're disused, they're vandalized, many in a state of disrepair. When I look and I see what people are talking about on social media, so many of them are saying, please, you need to fix up the courts. We need to look at police stations. We need to look at roads. We need to look at the parks that are out there and the things that we need to use that are there for the public. However, much of this is also protected by private security for these properties. So how do we balance this? And perhaps you can tell us how much is actually spent on private securities looking after these properties, and will that stop? That you can save the money and perhaps maybe do this with a state that they can look after these properties?
So to answer your question, we spend 263 million rand on private security, more than R250 million on private security every year. And clearly, that is something that needs to be looked at. And I've met with the financial team, and that is something that I'm going to get a briefing on to better understand, what buildings are we guarding, and do those buildings even exist? And, I suspect that we'll start to get to the bottom of those questions very clearly. We have leases that we pay billions of rands for every year for buildings that, quite frankly, we should be putting clients in and not leasing other buildings for them and then not being paid for. But I think that it is a national embarrassment, Leanne, that we have our magistrates, our judges working in buildings, courthouses that are falling apart. We have our teachers teaching in schools that are just not up to scratch. We still have children dying in pit latrines every year. And I've had a conversation with the Minister of Basic Education, Sibiwe Kwagube, and we are jointly committed to declaring a war on pit latrines and getting rid of them once and for all. We cannot have another child in South Africa die in a pit toilet in 2024. It's just not acceptable that we are still in that position. And so we need to act very forcefully and clearly against that. We want our police officers to be working in buildings that they are proud to be members of, and not patching the roofs themselves and sealing the windows themselves. That's not how we should be treating the people that give their time and service to our country. And so it is something that does require urgent attention. But at the same time, Leanne, I need to be realistic that it also requires money as well. And so that's why I've said I want this department to become a cash-generating department. We must become like a property group that generates more money than we currently do so that we can pay our bills, but then we can also start using that money to invest in infrastructure and fix up the buildings in the public sector.
Okay, Dean, one final question, and perhaps maybe one of the most important ones, is that you are faced with one of the most controversial and potentially economically damaging issues, and that, of course, is expropriation of land without compensation. Currently, the state owns nearly 5 million hectares of land that I know you've said you'd like to see being put to the benefit and the use of the public. But are you planning to release more state land to address spatial and socio-economic imbalances in the country? How are you going to handle this?
Absolutely, Leanne. I've already had cabinet colleagues come to me and start having those discussions. I've had mayors that have already called me and said, they'd like to have these discussions. And we've got to use public land for public good. It's not owned by me or you, it's owned by all of us. And so it's got to be better used. And I think that we have got to become far more nimble and quicker and act with speed when it comes to releasing public land, releasing public buildings. I had a message from an organization in Mamelodi that I'm going to go and see soon. They've raised money, can you believe it, Leanne, to actually build their own library in their community. And there's a piece of land owned by our department that they just can't get an answer to being able just to lease. They don't even want to take full ownership of it. They just want to lease it so that they can at least build construction or start construction at least for the library in their community. And so we've got to be able to make decisions quicker and release that in a better way than we've done previously. But these are all new systems that need to be built. They will take time. And I do ask, for South Africans to join us in this journey together. It's not going to be overnight. I don't want to make promises that I can't keep. But I do assure you and assure the people of this country that I am working day and night to right the ship and to make sure that public works for South Africa and that it's a department that everyone can trust. We are absolutely transparent and we deliver services to those who need them most and in a quick and efficient way.
All right, Minister, we'll leave it there for this morning. Thank you. Thanks very, very much for touching base with us. New to the portfolio, week in, that's your new Public Works Minister, Dean Macpherson, outlining some of his plans and his visions for the department. Again, Minister, thank you very, very much for joining us.